Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody joining from wherever you are. And welcome to this event, this live stream event by Product People. So before we begin, I would really like you to join us on slido.com, where you could ask questions and also answer the icebreaker poll that we have. So you have like two options to go about doing this. You could either scan the QR code that is on display right now, or you could directly go to slido.com and enter the code 3774677. And you can join us to make this a more interactive session by asking all your questions and answering the poll that we have. So the event that we have today is a topic that really hits home for everybody who is leading product teams and is in one. And that is leading grown-up product teams that will be conducted by Matt LeMay. So this is especially crucial when we want to build those efficient teams. And how best to do that beyond asking them to be as grown-ups and considering them as grown-ups in what they do. And that's exactly what Matt LeMay is here to speak and tell us about. So that being said, my name is Angelina Costa, and I have been in the product management and business analysis space for well over 5 years now. I worked in the B2B and even B2B2C spaces. And my industry experience mostly comes from banking and finance and e-procurement as well. And I have a degree in business information systems. And recently I made the move to product. So that being said, a bit about Product People and what exactly we do. So we have two main facets that we look at. So the first is we provide interim product management, product leadership, and product ops services to our 42 in-house employees. And then we also have free events and talks for Europe's largest PM communities with around 30,000 members. And that's how we give back to the community. And this is one such event, this live stream. And we also host offsite events across Europe as well. So before we get started, we want to get to know you a little bit. And the question that we have for you today is, do you know in specific and measurable terms what success looks like for your team in the next year? And your choices are A, I have clear goals and success metrics for my team. B, I know what success looks like, but it's not quite measurable. C, I have a rough idea of what success may look like for my team. And D, I don't yet have a definition of success for my team. So you could answer these questions on slido.com. You can scan the QR code or directly go to slido.com itself. This is definitely something that will really help us to get to know the audience a bit better, and for Matt also to understand you and have a clear idea of how things should be headed. So I'm really looking forward to these answers and what exactly the audience has to say. I'll give you a minute to answer these questions. Okay, and the answers are here. So the majority of the audience has gone with C. That is, they have a rough idea of what success may look like for their teams, with a 33% also mentioning D, saying that there's no proper definition of success for my team, and 17% has gone with B, and where they say that they know what success looks like, but it's not quite measurable. And we don't have anyone from the audience that has marked the answer as A, to say that there are clear goals and success metrics for the team. So that being said, without further ado, for the topic, leading grown-up product teams, Matt LeMay, over to you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I am super happy to be here. Let me share my screen. Sharing the screen. Great. You should be able to see my title slide. I'm really happy to be here with you today. I know I can't see your faces, but I feel your presence. As you already heard, please use the Slido, ask questions, engage and participate as much as you can. I want you to get as much from this time as you can. And part of how you do that is by asking questions and making the most of this opportunity for us to converse with each other synchronously. Here's sort of the gratuitous fancy slide of me. I've worked with some of these companies. I've written 2 books, Agile for Everybody and Product Management in Practice, which is now in its 2nd edition. I'm really proud of Product Management in Practice. And I am working on my next book, Impact First Product Teams. Actually finished up a chapter of it today, which feels really good. It's a book about the importance of putting business impact at the center of the we do as product teams, which is something we're going to talk about today, because I think that is a key part of leading and being a part of a grown-up product team, is to recognize that, yes, we work for a business, and it's really important that the work we do leads to the success of that business. So I want to take you back to the moment when I began having the idea for this book, which was a moment that really shaped a lot of the work I've done over the last couple of years as a consultant working with product teams and organizations. So I was working with a company that was ostensibly doing everything right. They had set really clear, specific, high-level goals for the business. We need this many new users. We need this much annual recurring revenue. Here is what success looks like for the business. They had then gone and conducted really high-quality discovery work to identify what was going to actually help their users transact and sign up and do the things they needed to achieve those goals. They then said, look, we've identified the work that would be high impact here. We've identified the parts of the user journey that need to be improved. We've identified the work that we believe would get us to achieving our goals as a business. Amazing. So now we just have to go to the individual product teams and see who wants to take on this critical high impact work that we've identified. So they go to the product teams and say, great news, we've identified the most valuable work you can do that is going to lead the business to achieving its high-level success metrics. And these product teams looked around and said, that's awesome, but not me. I don't want to do it. We have what our team has been tasked with doing. We have the area of the application that we are tasked with working on. We have a backlog. We have stuff to do. It's great that you found this new stuff, but we're not going to do it. And this really confused me, because like ostensibly this is what product teams exist to do. They've been handed the work that is going to deliver success for the business. And yet all of them, like, we don't want to do this right now. So I had a bunch of informal conversations with product leaders at this organization. And eventually one of them said something to me that changed the course of my work dramatically. They said, look, yeah, I see how this would be the most important thing to work on at the moment, but it just doesn't fall within any product team's responsibilities. And the truth is, product managers here are already exhausted from their responsibilities changing after the last reorg. And perhaps this was a bit cold and unfeeling of me, but I looked at this and I was like, who cares? This is a business. Like, yeah, change is hard. Managing change is difficult and challenging, but it's part of what we sign up for. We sign up to do the work that's important to the business, not to say, oh, you already changed my work once, so you don't get to change it again. No backsies. I couldn't shake this idea that choosing not to do the most important thing for the business because well-compensated professionals are cranky, it's just not the grown-up thing to do. Moreover, there was something else that really bothered me about this situation, which was that ostensibly this company had reorged in order to increase the impact of the work that product teams were doing. They had reorged to become higher impact, but then they were accepting lower impact work because people were tired from the reorg. And this is something that I've seen at a lot of organizations where they get really wrapped up in doing the right thing, choosing the right operating model, setting OKRs the right way, to the point where that abstract notion of doing things the right way somehow becomes more important than building the right things for the business and its users. And after this experience, I was just left thinking that if you want to develop a product team that delivers those big, important business outcomes, you need to treat them like grown-ups. You need to be able to have difficult grown-up conversations. You need to be able to say, yes, things are shifting. They're shifting because they need to shift in order for the business to succeed. You need to be able to deal with the fact that sometimes people are going to be upset and unhappy by those changes, and that's okay. If you want to be a valuable part of such a team, you need to be able to act like a grown-up and acknowledge that sometimes the things we want to do, the things that make us feel safe and in control, are not actually the things that the business needs. So we're going to spend the rest of our time today before we get to Q&A, which again is the part of this I am looking forward to the most, talking about how we create grown-up product teams. And as you may have guessed from the question you were asked at the very beginning, the first and most important thing we can do is to be clear, specific, and realistic about what the business needs to succeed and to survive. Above all else, a grown-up product team is grounded in the reality of the business and the market. We know what we need to succeed. We know how we are doing towards that success. We know if we're struggling. I've worked with a lot of companies, especially in the kind of startup boom of the 2010s, where the entire organization was really far removed from the reality of the business and the market. We had founders and executives who didn't want to discourage people, who just showed up every morning and said, we're doing awesome, everything is great. And then one day we all showed up and it was like, nope, surprise, actually, we're doing terribly and we're out of business. And I was always really frustrated in those situations, not only because my company was out of business, but also because I felt like I never really had a chance to make the decisions that might have set us on the right course. When we're grounded in the reality of the business and the market, it actually guides us to what I find is a more sustainable form of customer centricity. I was just writing a chapter about this in the book about how a lot of organizations get really hung up on this question of how much discovery should we do? What is the right amount of discovery? And the truth is, it's really hard to answer that question if you do not have specific goals that are grounded in the reality of the business and the market. If you don't know how many users need to do what in what time frame for you to succeed, then you don't know how much discovery and what kind of discovery is the right amount and type of discovery to do. Now, the challenge here is that doing this means committing the team to delivering against specific goals, right? If we want to be grounded in reality, we need to anchor that to something measurable and specific, to things like revenue and growth and how many users convert and when and how. And a lot of teams will resist this for really good reason. That reason being that these goals are, again, out of our control. They require user and market level things to happen. And that can be really scary, especially when we are not accustomed to having realistic expectations. So a lot of organizations I've worked with have oscillated between unclear expectations and unreasonable expectations. Again, in those organizations where we have leadership that wants to be everybody's best friend and keep things chill and open, they tend to say, like, whatever you do is great. You're an empowered team. Go do whatever you think is right. And the team comes back and says, we did this. And leaders say, oh, not that thing. I don't like that one thing that you did. This is not actually what it means to empower a team. On the other hand, some of us have been through this kind of unreasonable expectation thing where you're given a number that is outside of your control and told basically, like, you'd better hit this target. This team had better turn $100,000 into $100 million or else, which again is also not reasonable. There are dynamics outside of our control. And when you tell a team, hit your numbers or else, they're likely to get demoralized. And frankly, they're likely to give up at a certain point if it seems like they're not going to hit those numbers. It is rare, but I have worked with teams that have found a happy medium here. And a lot of this often involves leadership being really clear about what the team is accountable for in terms of discovering and delivering the work that best positions the business to achieve its goals. In other words, every conversation realigns to business goals, to those high-level market-level business goals, but isn't framed as a combative conversation, isn't framed as you'd better do this or else, but is better framed as like, how is this going to help us get there? And grown-up, high-performing product teams always have a point of view on this. They always have a point of view on how this is going to get us to what the business needs in order to succeed. Adam Thomas has a really great framework for this called survival metrics, which is basically thinking about, okay, not just what does success look like, but what do we need to see, again, at a market level in order to continue investing in the work that we've done. And when I work with organizations, one of the first exercises I often do is this red light, yellow light, green light exercise that really focuses on what, again, at a market level needs to be true in order for us to continue investing in our approach, in order for us to shift, and what is basically the best we can do and still not have a path to survival. These are difficult conversations to have, but again, I think oftentimes the most valuable exercise I run through with teams and organizations is this very exercise. I put a link here so you can access this template if you're so inclined. You are, of course, always welcome to reach out to me if you'd like to run this exercise. But I find it really helpful to put specific numbers against this because in the absence of those specific numbers, it is very hard to make specific decisions. So for all of you who answered, yeah, I kind of have a sense of what success looks like for my team. The ambiguity in that kinda can be really, really dangerous because it can mean the difference between your team being a successful team in the eyes of the business and your team being an unsuccessful team in the eyes of the business. So to quickly summarize here, your team needs to grow up if you are assuming or pretending that the business is doing super duper great, right? Grown-up teams are honest and direct about the fiscal and existential health of the business. Teams need to grow up when they are passively receiving accountability, especially retroactively, when they're like, oh, wait, we're just kind of doing what we think is right. And they don't have a point of view on how their work connects directly to the success of the business. Grown-up teams seek accountability for their contribution to the success of the business. Again, this is scary. You are seeking accountability for things that are outside of your control. But grown-up teams do this because they own that point of view and they can manage that point of view. If you are the passive, retroactive recipient of somebody else's point of view on why your team's work matters, that is a very dangerous position to be in. Last but not least, it is not a grown-up thing to make everyone happy because we're a big family. It is a grown-up thing to make tough decisions together because, again, we're a business. We're a business working to succeed as a business. Okay. Secondly, relatedly, Grown-up teams measure progress against those high-level goals and make decisions with and for your teams accordingly. Again, those high-level business goals we are working towards should inform every decision that your team makes. They should be front and center at all times. And you as a team should have and maintain a strong point of view on how every bit of work you do ladders up to those critical success and survival goals for the business. The number one anti-pattern I see around this is teams that only think about high-level goals during OKR season or planning season. This is deranged to me. This makes no sense. When a team is like, oh, we've got to spend a couple months thinking about our high-level goals so we can move forward. This is a team of school children doing the bare minimum to complete the assignment, not a team of adults working to deliver success for a business. If you only have a season where you think about the goals you're setting, then you're not taking those goals seriously. Even worse is when the work of setting those goals winds up standing in for doing the actual work that will deliver against those goals. This slide from Christina Wadke is something that I think about a lot and I call upon a lot in the book I'm working on. And what she basically says is that every team's goals should be one click or one mathematical operation away from the company goals. This is so important, right? Because this means that every team, no matter how big or small, should understand how its work contributes to the success of the business. The issue on the left, which I see so many organizations going through, is where they kind of go on, they're like, all right, company goals, we cascade those down to departments, then we cascade them down to groups, then we cascade them down to this, and we cascade them, and then we have like level 1 through level 10 OKRs. The OKR setting process takes 3 months out of teams' productive time. And at the end, what they've accomplished is cascading things down to a level of apparent control where each team can achieve its own OKRs while doing nothing to deliver success for the business. One thing I often do with organizations that have set these multi-level OKRs is to ask them, do your level 10 OKRs add up to your level 1 OKRs? And if the answer is no, or we don't know, or there's 5,000 level 10 OKRs, how could we answer that? Then we delete the level 10 OKRs and go back up. Okay, do the level 9 OKRs add up to the level 1 OKRs? The answer is, and we keep going, and almost every time we are just left with 2 levels, right? We're left with that company goals, and then, as Christina Wadke suggests in this diagram, team goals that are 1 click away from those. Again, once this really takes hold, then the realities of your business, your market, and your users start to inform all the decisions we make, from prioritization to things like hiring and promotions and incentives. I had the pleasure when I was working with MailChimp of working with David Dewey, who is now a product leader at Cord Commerce. And he used to ask folks who sought promotion this question: what could the business achieve with you in this promoted role that it cannot currently achieve? And I love this question because this is a question that is aligning your journey with the journey of the business, which is saying, look, if we're going to put you in a promoted role, it's not just because you've worked really hard or you're really smart. Presumably, there is a benefit to the business associated with putting you in a role of greater responsibility. Great product leaders think this way. They think about every decision as an opportunity to align the success of the business, the success of the team, and the success of the individual. And when they see places where these things are misaligned, when they see that a functional team perhaps might be measuring success in a way that is at odds with the success of the cross-functional team, or that an individual is seeking success in a way that might be at odds with the success of the business overall, they do everything in their power to align those things. So again, your team needs to grow up. If you're prioritizing the work that people want to do because you want them to feel good. You are a grown-up team if you are prioritizing the work that you believe will be the most impactful to the business and its users. You need to grow up if you are setting goals that you can control, that do not depend on user and market level dynamics, as tempting as it might be. There is just too much risk involved in that. You are a mature team if you are setting goals that align with the success of the business. Again, I love this rule: one step away, one mathematical operator away from whatever the business has defined as its most important goals. You need to grow up if you are promoting people because they asked for it many times and you are very sleepy tired, or being promoted because you have asked for it many times and you hope that your manager is very sleepy tired and will eventually say, okay, you know what? I give up. Fine, you're promoted. You are a grown-up team when you promote folks because they can have a better impact in the elevated role, or seeking promotion because you can make a clear case for the impact you will have in that promotion. Last but not least, we just need to grow up and get real. We need to learn to love the reality of our business in our market. Because the truth is, reality has a way of asserting itself, whether we like it or not. Some of you may have been following the news of the tech layoffs that have been happening in a lot of places. When Spotify laid off about 17% of its workforce, they made this really interesting comment. We still have too many people dedicated to supporting work and even doing work around the work rather than contributing to opportunities with real impact. And a lot of people I know pointed out very rightly, well, if that's the case, why aren't the executives who told those teams to do those things and hired those people the one getting in trouble rather than the people who are simply doing the work that they were told to do? Now, it's kind of blown my mind sometimes that in product world, I've worked with folks who, the business can ask them like, what's the ROI of your team? What's the contribution you're making? And they say, how dare you ask me that? That's not how this is supposed to work. Product teams can never be accountable for revenue targets. Because it's like, okay, that might be academically correct in the way you understand it, but if you don't have a point of view on why your team is valuable, at some point, somebody in a boardroom somewhere is going to be looking at your team and saying, hey, this team's pretty expensive. Do we really need them? Again, we can make as many cases as we want for why this is unjust or unreasonable, and I think that there's a very good point to those cases. But at the end of the day, if our team is not contributing to the success of the business, or if we can't have a point of view on how our team contributes to the success of the business, we are in a very vulnerable situation. Now, unfortunately, many product organizations, especially large product organizations, find themselves stuck in this pattern, which I call the low impact death spiral. Here's how this works. Teams take on low impact work because it's the easiest work to take on, right? As I experienced early on in the story I shared with you, teams don't always want to take on high impact work because they might have other work scoped. High impact work often means the most coordination across teams. It means that suddenly you have scrutiny from people in the organization who you've never even spoken to before, right? The second a team is like, we're going to have this much impact on revenue, somehow like the chief financial officer appears out of nowhere and is like, I have opinions on this. And you're like, I don't want to talk to this person. So you have a lot of teams doing low impact work because it's the easiest and most defensible work to do. Lots of teams pushing out lots of low impact work creates a more complicated product, right? If you use major products from huge software companies, then you probably have experienced this, where there are all these weird little features crammed in, and you're like, why is this the way it is? Users get frustrated, but the effects within the company are even worse, right? Which is that suddenly you have all these dependencies and conflicts to manage. Suddenly, the cost of doing high impact work only gets greater because you have 20 teams pushing low impact work into a complicated product. So you wind up with more and more teams saying, like, I'm not going to do high impact work. I'm not going to do the difficult stuff. That is way too difficult. I'm just going to keep doing this low impact stuff over here, and on it goes until it becomes nearly impossible to actually do impactful work within a medium to large product organization. And here's the funny thing. Most organizations just see the symptoms of this, not the cause, right? so many meetings to manage dependencies. It's too hard to make any major changes to the product. Or, as the CEO of Spotify said, teams are doing work around the work. And they wind up treating the symptoms without addressing the root cause. So they say, we need to add a program management layer. We need to add more operations people. We need to add more coordination layers. Rather than saying, like, why do we have all these teams pushing all this work that might not only be low impact, but might be making things worse? Again, the issue here is low impact work. And if we truly stay focused on the outcomes we deliver for the business, that means that we have to recognize the cost of doing low impact things, even if we are doing them the right way. Even if we are going about a perfectly choreographed discovery and delivery process, delivering things that are low impact, that is often making things worse, not making things better. And again, we have to find the source of the defensibility of our work, not in, look, we're doing it the right way, but rather in, look, we're doing things that are contributing to the success of our business in ways that we as product teams can speak to. So we need to grow up if we are adding more layers to coordinate low impact work, right? We are often putting a band-aid on a problem that actually makes the problem worse. We have to be willing to realign teams towards high impact work, which is really challenging to do. Part of what that means is that we can no longer have teams building the next most defensible thing. There is a critical and challenging mindset shift I have seen many teams go through, where they go from thinking our job is just to find the next most defensible thing to build to saying, like, we cost money to this business and we have to find a way to deliver enough value to the business to justify our very existence as a team. In other words, we need to build things that deliver on what the business needs to succeed. And last but not least, this is really tough because so many of us, we're here because we're interested in the right way to build products. But we need to realize that success doesn't mean doing things the right way. It means doing the right things. Like it or not, we work for the business. We work for a business. And again, we can have whatever arguments we want to have about whether or not product teams should be accountable to revenue and growth, what the right altitude is to set our goals as product teams. But at the end of the day, if our business is not succeeding, we will bear the consequences of that, whether or not we think it is righteous and just for us to bear those consequences. The sooner we embrace this, the more impactful we can become. And honestly, we can be less annoying too. We can get less into these kind of academic and abstract conversations about, like, what is the right way theoretically to do product work? Because the reality is the right way is going to vary enormously based on what our company's business model is, what our funding model is, what success looks like, what we need to succeed. We get into these abstract conversations in part because I think we're afraid to have the real conversations about what our businesses need. When we can have those real conversations, it is daunting, but it is also ultimately freeing because the work we are doing is aligned with the reality of our fate as a business and as a team. That's my spiel about that. That's my website. That's my email address. That's where you can find me on LinkedIn, where I talk about product stuff. That's where you can find me on Instagram, where I mostly post fashion and food stuff. And that is my presentation. So let me stop this share if I can figure out how to do that. Should be able to figure out how to do this. Why am I struggling so much? If I press escape, does that do something? Yes, it does. So let's talk.
All righty. Thank you, Matt, for that insightful session in building grown-up teams. And thank you so much for the audience for listening and tuning in. And this is now your chance to make it work and really present and share with us the questions that you have for Matt. As Matt said, this is the most exciting and interesting part that he's really looking forward to. So make sure that you post your questions. Please send it through Slido. So again, Just to refresh, you can either scan the QR or directly post it through slido.com using the code that we have on display. So to buy you some time, audience, I'll be just going through a few slides in terms of product people. So while I'm at this, please feel free to drop in all the questions and clarifications that you have. So product people works best in these different use cases. So the first is for interim or fractional product manager positions where we cover permanent positions, parental leaves, and we could also step in for very important and urgent initiatives. So these generally go about 3 to 12 months. And that's where our engagement truly lies at. And the second use case is that we can provide product coaching or consultants where we can coach your product management teams and also create and streamline your process and programs that you have. So from 0 to 1 in hypergrowth or even at scale. And the third use case is product discovery, where we can discover the next impactful initiative or product by doing the market and user research to business model and things like that. Or we can also run a low or no code pilot or MVP and really discover ideas and align with the teams and also run and kick off the next iterations. So this is like a very snapshot and very overall view of some of the B2C clients we have worked with, from all the way from Zalando to DeepL and Emma, certain brands you might even have heard of. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just a summary of the B2C clients we've worked with. And these are the B2B clients. So we've also worked with the World Health Organization and brands like Cognigai and Sastrify. So this is a snapshot view of the product people stats. We are supporting 200 cross-functional teams already, all the way from Series A startups to even publicly listed companies. We have 42 product leaders and product managers in-house providing services to all our clients. And we also have 62% of women in the team, with 66% of them being in leadership positions. So this is the people behind product people. So as to say, and this is our team of product experts, our product people. So thank you all for listening in. And that being said, I'm really looking forward to the questions that you have posted so that I could share that with Matt. So Matt, the first question is, any advice on how to advocate for tech debt in this model, assuming that tech debt doesn't directly create impact, but enables other changes that would?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think this question of, the kind of two special cases that usually get brought up are tech debt and supporting work. I think that with tech debt, it's actually much easier to make the case for tech debt when you're talking about impact, because tech debt is often measurable in some of the same terms as impact in terms of time and money. So if your company is looking at revenue goals, for example, then tech debt actually becomes a lot more measurable and impactful when you're looking at those high level things, right? If you can say, hey, this tech debt is going to cost this much engineering time, which, roughly maths out to this much money, whereas if you invest this much now, we save this much in the future. Those are real terms. Similarly, if a team can measure its impact or can predict or estimate its impact, then you can predict or estimate the impact of that tech debt in similar terms. So if a team is working to deliver this much revenue or this many users by this date, you can say, hey, this tech debt is actually costing them this much of their time, which in the terms you are measuring adds up to this much. So if we solve it now, we're actually better positioned to do so and to deliver against those goals in the time frame we've set. On the flip side, if the reality is that you need to deliver a certain outcome, whether that's revenue or growth, to get to that next stage of survival, then this approach lets you say, like, yeah, we need to take on that tech debt, because if we don't get to this, we don't need to raise the next round, or we don't meet investor expectations, or there is some real business milestone that we cannot achieve. So again, I think when you are looking at the reality of business impact, it is easier to have those conversations about tech debt trade-offs. I also think it's easier to have conversations about ethical trade-offs versus when you are kind of mired in the ambiguity of talking about lower level goals or things like capacity, which might not map directly to what the business actually needs.
Righty. Thank you, Matt. And the second question is, can you speak to an experience when the product wasn't stable or had relatively big fires to resolve, and how you or team went about it? P.S. Great talk.
Well, thank you so much. Gosh, when the product was unstable or there were big fires to put out, again, I think part of the challenge here is when you have defined what success and survival looks like for the business, then you can define what unstable means and what fires to put out means. Um, I've certainly worked on products where like the technology is a little unstable or unreliable, or where you know, there are fires to put out in whatever way. But I think the challenge to figuring out which of those fires to put out and how sustainably to put them out, again, largely comes down to have we specifically defined what success means for the business? Because there can be situations, early Twitter is kind of a classic example of like all these supposed rules of like, if people see a product that's scaling awkwardly, they'll stop using it. Just didn't hold true, right? People kept using Twitter because early Twitter was awesome. And if you got the fail whale, you got the fail whale, but you kept trying because it was worth trying. And getting that scale early on was more important than having stability. You can look at other products, especially if you're working in a space like healthcare or insurtech, where stability is probably more important than scale, because if we lose stability, we lose trust. If we lose trust, we lose everything. So again, I think part of the challenge here is again starting with really specific decisions about what success means to the business and what trade-offs we're willing to make in order to get to that success. Because just about every absolute rule about, you always need stability or no, you always need scale, they hold truer in some situations than in other situations. And having that clear-eyed, realistic look at like, what is our business? What is our business model? What is our funding model? What do we need in order to succeed? Is the only way to have those conversations in a way that's actually helpful.
Okay. So the next question is, do you have any tips for very, very large companies, like tens of thousands? It's typically much easier to tie to company goals at a smaller company.
Yeah, I do, and I'm glad you asked. So in big companies like that, I think as you get to that scale, the work of connecting your team's work to company goals becomes weirdly and counterintuitively a little bit more ambiguous, which is to say you probably have a lot of different company goals, and you're actually going to have to do more work to figure out what your relationship is to those goals. So I've worked at big companies where people wind up literally Googling, the last investor presentation to understand what promises have been made to shareholders so that they can tie their work into those promises. Because once you start asking around, it's really hard to get a clear answer. In my experience, if you are working at a large company, you are better off, again, having a clear sense of what your team is working towards and working to socialize that sense rather than waiting for it to be handed down through all the levels of a very complex organization. For example, I worked with one team at a company where the company strategy, as they understood it, was very much aligned on new products. However, they were working on an existing product, and they said, "Well, what do we do? We're off strategy." And I said, "All right, let's look at some other things that have happened. Like, what are the promises that the company has made to shareholders? What are their projections?" And sure enough, there were specific revenue projections that had been made. So when this company was tasked with presenting what it was working on, they said, while we understand that the company's strategy is largely tied to new products, the work we're doing is going to be critical for delivering this much revenue, which is going to help us move the needle towards the company's overall goals of that much revenue. Nobody argued with them about this. in part because, again, they did the work of having that point of view rather than just waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. And I think one of the things I have come to learn, which again seems somewhat counterintuitive, is that when you are working at a very large company, there's actually sometimes more ambiguity for you to deal with if you want to connect the work you are doing to the overall success of the company. Uh, but I've seen teams do that successfully where, again, they're dealing with managers who are also struggling with that ambiguity. And when the team itself can have a really strong point of view around how their work ties into those company level goals, even if that can be hard to come by, it puts them in a much stronger position.
Okay. So the next question is, what flags suggest you are in a death spiral of low impact work? And what do you do to get teams to stop, regroup, and realign around impact or value?
That's a great question. So there's a couple of signs. I gotta pull up. I answered this in the book I'm writing because there's a whole thing about what are the signs you might be in the low impact death spiral. I have yes, there it is. Number one, if your team's goals are complicated and confusing, if your goals are unclear, that probably means that you are working on low impact things. Number two, if your team measures its success by how much stuff it does or how fast it does stuff. Number three, if your team builds lots of cool and defensible seeming things without doing any commercial market or user research. Number four, if your team spends more time debating how to do things than it does actually doing those things. And number five, if you have a sneaking suspicion that you are on a low impact team. So most teams are low impact teams. And most big organizations are in the low impact death spiral. I think the only way to get out of it is to actually drive accountability at an impact level. So I just wrote up a story about an organization I was working with that was very much in this low impact death spiral. The biggest symptom for them was that they were caught up in this relentless debate over how much discovery work they should be doing. Like, is it too much discovery? Is it not enough discovery? It's like the kind of debate you have the capacity to engage in when you are not actually doing high impact work. And the CEO of this company posted something in the all company Slack that's basically like, hey, I've been using our onboarding experience. It seems really convoluted. Um, I've talked to a few people, and I think that if we make it simpler, we can get a 2% increase in our conversion rate in the next 3 months. Let's go do it. And initially, people were really outraged, but they were like, how could the CEO come in with a specific goal like this? This isn't fair. We're being micromanaged. We're not empowered. But once it became clear that CEO was actually holding teams accountable to this, suddenly they were like, all right, I guess we've got to learn, like, where are people getting stuck? What are the challenges? How do we do this? How do we make this work? Again, I think the only way to break teams out of this cycle is to set accountability at the impact level. Because if you give teams downstream enough goals that they can achieve those goals without having to deliver impact, they will always do that, right? If I'm on a team and you say like, all right, your success is to build these 3 features or to do this thing outside of your control, you're going to say like, woe is me, we're a feature factory, but also, yes, I will deliver those 3 features. It has been really interesting to see how, in a lot of cases, once organizations try to instill accountability on the order of outcomes and impact, teams that have complained about being accountable for output and features often wind up coming back to that because it's honestly easier. It's more within their control. So again, somewhat counterintuitively, I think a lot of the challenge here is just to stop doing a lot of the cascading of goals that happens, to ask teams to pick up the work that they believe is going to be most impactful and to only ask them when they come to present work or justify features how this is going to deliver impact. Um, Easier said than done for sure, and very difficult to do both logistically and emotionally. But in my experience, when you shift the types of questions you're asking and the way you ask teams to think about and justify the work they're doing, eventually they can no longer take on low impact work because that work is just not an acceptable answer to what work are you doing.
All righty. So next up we have, for you, is business impact synonymous with business value, or do you see
Mm,
it as a mix of business and customer value?
that's a great question. So to me, business impact is business value at the market level, which is to say the activation of the business model. So people look at things like revenue and they say, well, revenue is an intrinsically it's a company centric goal. It's not customer centric. And to me, it's the business model. There is customer centricity involved in revenue because if people aren't paying you, then you don't have revenue. To me, business impact is looking at value as an exchange. I think that's a little bit different from business value. I sometimes when I hear about like business value versus customer value, I get a little thrown by that because ostensibly you need to do something valuable for your customers in order to achieve business value. There's an incident I think about a lot where I was working with a company that had a really phenomenal engineering leadership team. And one of their engineering leaders went to the CEO and said, I'm kind of worried because I don't hear our engineers talking enough about the business model. And the CEO said, wait a second, I have product managers coming in here complaining to me all day about how we're too business centric and not customer centric enough. And now you're complaining to me because engineers aren't talking about the business model? Like, what's going on? And this engineering leader, asked a few questions. And eventually she said, okay, I think I understand what's going on. When people complain about us being too business centric, they're talking about things like being too concerned with executive opinions, being too concerned with the politics of the organization, being too concerned with our own operational things. When I talk about the business model, I am talking about an exchange of value. And when we focus on an exchange of value, we are being intrinsically customer centric because we need to understand what value we're delivering to our customers in order for them to deliver value back to us. So I think for me, when we talk about the success of a business, we are also talking about the value that business delivers to its users. Because in a real world market scenario, a business often cannot be successful unless it is delivering value to its customers.
All righty. And last question that we have is,
Yes.
have you encountered teams where the role of product managers are murky? How best to navigate that and bring clarity so that teams are aligned?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say I have only encountered teams where the role of product manager is murky. To me, product management is a generalist business accountable role. Generalist in that you're going to have to do lots of different things depending on what kind of product you're working on, what the team needs, what the organization needs, and business accountable in that you are ultimately accountable for the success of your product and team and business. So again, I think that having that specificity of goals is what enables product management to flourish, even when the role itself is ambiguous. One way I like to think about it is imagine that you're having a bunch of friends over for dinner and you say, we're going to cook dinner together. And you have a recipe. You say, like, here's what success looks like. People will naturally self-organize when they understand what success looks like, right? They're like, all right, we have to cook this recipe. Let's like go do some shopping, get the ingredients. Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? Imagine if you get a bunch of people together and you say, let's just cook dinner. What do we want to cook for dinner? People start to get into weird debates. They start to be like, well, I don't like this. I don't like that. I don't know. If you don't know what success looks like, then the team cannot self-organize. Um, so again, I think a lot of the challenge and a lot of where I see effective product management, kind of going back to that question of what do you do if you are at a big organization where this is really challenging, defining what success looks like is really high leverage work. If you as a product manager can get your team aligned towards what success looks like and why that matters to the business, then the team is much more likely to do effective and meaningful work. Conversely, if you are not doing that and you're just like, well, I need clarity. What is my role supposed to be? What am I supposed to be doing? Odds are you are not doing high leverage work. Odds are you are not actually doing stuff which is going to help lead your team to success. So I think, I've found that in a lot of my work, when I am brought in to address questions of role clarity, I actually am looking at questions of goal clarity. Because when you have goal clarity, you don't need that same degree of role clarity. You will naturally collaborate towards solving problems together when you know what those problems are and what success looks like.
All righty. Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for answering the questions of the audience.
Thank you for
In
the
the
great
interest,
questions.
in the interest of time, we'll be winding up the Q&A. If you do have any further questions or clarifications that you would like from Matt, please feel free to reach out to him, and I'm sure he could help you out with your queries. So that being said, thank you so much, Matt, again, for this insightful session and for sharing your expertise, knowledge, and practical experience on this topic. Thank you so much. Um, and an audience, so our next live stream will be on the 30th of April, where we'll be discussing opening the B2B product innovation black box with Danielle. So feel free to tune in, and we'll be streaming on both YouTube and LinkedIn. So, and thank you so much for being here today, for being with us and listening in to this live stream. So please feel free to reach out and work with our people. Check out our podcast, Telegram, and Meetup channels. So thank you and have a nice rest of the day. Thank you so much. Live stream.